It started with a whisper, a voice that no one expected to hear, Prince Harry's own. After years of silence, of defending the woman he thought he loved, of protecting a story that the world once believed was a fairy tale, he finally broke. Not with rage, not with a statement from the palace or a Netflix camera rolling, but with honesty, raw, trembling honesty. "Our marriage," he said quietly, "has been a lie. She was never in love with me." For a man who had built his entire adult life around the promise of love, the boy who lost his mother to the cruelty of the tabloids, the soldier who searched for purpose beyond the palace walls, this confession hit harder than anything before. Because this time, it wasn't the press turning on him. It was the truth turning on him. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But how did it get here? How did the golden couple, the Duke and Duchess who were supposed to modernize the monarchy, become symbols of broken dreams and manipulation? The answer didn't come overnight. It came in pieces. Late-night realizations, forgotten texts, unanswered calls, silent dinners. Imagine it. You give up your family, your titles, your country, for someone who told you that love conquers all, only to realize, years later, that love was never part of the equation. What would that do to a person? To a prince who once said he'd found his soulmate? That's where this story begins. Not with a royal wedding or an Oprah interview, but with the moment the illusion shattered. Because when Harry opened up, he didn't just expose Meghan. He exposed himself, his vulnerability, his naivety, and the dangerous cost of loving someone who may have loved the spotlight more than him. He'd spent years defending her. "The woman I love," he used to say, standing against headlines, against the institution, against his own blood. He walked away from everything that defined him. His regiment, his home, his grandmother's legacy. The tabloids called it Megxit, but for Harry, it wasn't an exit. It was an escape. Or so he thought. But here's the question. What if the escape was the trap? What if everything Harry ran from, the coldness of royal life, the scrutiny, the loneliness, found him again, but this time behind California's Golden Gates? He told friends that the first cracks appeared when the cameras stopped rolling, that the laughter turned to silence, the passion turned to planning. It was like living with a publicist, he said. Every gesture, every smile, rehearsed. Even when we were alone, it felt like we were performing. The irony? That's exactly what one of Meghan's former colleagues said about her years before the royal romance. She never stopped acting, the insider whispered. Even off camera. And Harry? He mistook the performance for devotion. But why now? Why speak out after years of loyalty and silence? Sources close to him say the breaking point wasn't fame or pressure, it was truth. Truth he could no longer deny. A truth buried beneath contracts, press tours, and promises that began to sound like scripts. One night, while reviewing an old email thread, something routine, something harmless, Harry stumbled upon a message that changed everything. It wasn't addressed to him. It wasn't about love. It was about opportunity. And in that single moment, everything he thought he knew about his marriage, about the woman he'd risked it all for, began to unravel. But before we get there, let's rewind. Because to understand how Harry ended up in this emotional freefall, you have to understand the man he was before Meghan. A soldier, a rebel, a prince with a chip on his shoulder and a hole in his heart. The world adored him because he was human, flawed, relatable, wounded. Diana's boy, the royal who dared to be different. Then she appeared, confident, charismatic, American, everything the monarchy wasn't. Meghan was the modern fairy tale, the actress turned duchess, the outsider who conquered the oldest institution in Europe. Together, they promised something revolutionary: love over duty, authenticity over tradition. But what if it was never about love or authenticity at all? What if Meghan's story was written long before she met Harry? A story where every headline, every photo, every appearance was a step towards something bigger. Harry once described their relationship as a whirlwind. That whirlwind became a hurricane, one that swept away centuries of royal tradition. Overnight, they became the most talked-about couple on earth. Hollywood adored them. The media devoured them. And somewhere in between, Harry lost himself. Because while Meghan was building a brand, Harry was trying to build a family. And in that imbalance, cracks began to form. He'd been warned, not by courtiers or the Queen, but by friends. "Be careful, mate," one said. "She's ambitious." But Harry dismissed it as jealousy. After all, hadn't they said the same about his mother? He believed love could conquer anything. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that love without truth isn't love. It's illusion. And slowly, that illusion began to fade. It started small. Moments that didn't add up. A quiet dinner where Meghan spent more time on her phone than looking at him. A carefully staged photo op that he didn't know was planned. Comments about image, optics, and media strategy that felt transactional. Still, Harry justified it all. "She's under pressure," he told himself. "She's protecting us." But deep down, a voice kept whispering, the same voice he'd ignored before. Something isn't right. That voice grew louder after the Oprah interview. Meghan's tears, her accusations, the world's sympathy, it all looked powerful on TV. But off-screen, Harry saw the cracks. The rehearsals, the precision. He realized that even their pain had become a performance. And here's where it gets dark. The more Harry tried to reconnect, the more distant she became. He began to feel like an accessory in his own life, a prop beside her, not a partner. He wasn't the hero of his own story anymore. He was the supporting character in hers. He told friends he felt used to gain sympathy, used to build a global platform, used to legitimize a narrative. Still, he stayed. Because love, or what he thought was love, makes fools of us all. Until that night. A night when a simple message shattered the facade. It wasn't a tabloid leak. It wasn't gossip. It was personal. A message that revealed how Meghan saw their marriage. Not as a union, but as a transaction. Harry didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He just stared at the screen, numb. The words were ordinary, polite even. But the meaning behind them, chilling. Because in that moment, he realized she never loved him. Not the way he loved her. Not the way he believed in her. She loved what he represented. The access, the influence, the global sympathy. It wasn't a partnership. It was a strategy. And for the first time, the prince who once walked away from the crown began to wonder if he'd walked straight into a cage. But here's the twist. Even as the truth hit him, Harry didn't go public. Not yet. Because some part of him, the part still craving the fairy tale, wanted to believe it could be fixed. So he stayed silent, smiling in photos, holding her hand at charity events, pretending everything was fine while his world quietly collapsed behind closed doors. And that silence? That's what broke him more than anything. Because silence has a way of amplifying the truth. Every smile became heavier, every appearance more forced, and every whisper of trouble in paradise from the media felt like a knife twisting deeper. Until one day, he couldn't pretend anymore. And when he finally opened his mouth, when the words came out, trembling but clear, the world stopped. "Our marriage has been a lie. She was never in love with me." He didn't say it to destroy her. He said it because he could no longer destroy himself by keeping quiet. He said it because sometimes, even a prince has to admit he's been played. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because what Harry discovered next, about how deep the deception really went, would make even his most loyal supporters question everything they thought they knew about this royal romance. And when he confronted the person responsible, it wasn't Meghan. It was someone far closer. Someone who'd known all along. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began on a night that wasn't supposed to matter. No cameras, no entourage, no statements waiting for approval. Just Prince Harry alone in the dim glow of a Montecito lamp, staring at his reflection in the glass. He'd spent years defending a story, a love, a woman who seemed to embody everything he thought he needed. But that night, it was different. Something cracked, quietly, invisibly, in the heart of a man who once gave up everything for love. He didn't plan to say anything. He didn't plan to confess. But when he finally spoke, the words came out like a wound bleeding through silk. "She was never in love with me," he whispered. And that whisper, overheard by the one friend he still trusted, would ripple through the royal world like a silent explosion. The friend didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort. He just listened as Harry poured out years of confusion and pain. The guilt of walking away, the humiliation of realizing the truth too late, and the ache of knowing that maybe everyone else had seen it before he did. "Mate," the friend finally said, "you've been living someone else's script." Harry didn't respond, because deep down, he knew it was true. He had ignored the warnings, from his brother, from courtiers, even from old army mates who told him she wasn't what she seemed. He thought they were jealous. He thought they were blind to what he saw, a woman who made him feel alive. But now, sitting in silence, he realized he had mistaken control for passion, strategy for love. He took another sip of whiskey, something he rarely did these days, and muttered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." That sentence lingered in the air, because it wasn't just about Meghan. It was about everything. The weight of the royal name he'd tried to shed, the rebellion that became regret, and the haunting echo of his mother's fate. He once said he'd left the royal family to protect his wife. Now he was wondering if he needed to protect himself from her. The friend asked quietly, "When did you start feeling it?" Harry hesitated. "Paris," he said, "during Fashion Week." It was months earlier, but that moment was seared into his memory. Meghan had gone ahead, gliding through the crowd like she owned the city, cameras flashing, designer gowns swirling. Harry was supposed to join her, but when he arrived, he realized he wasn't expected or wanted at all. He stood off to the side, unseen, as Meghan laughed with Hollywood executives, producers, and stylists. They weren't talking about charity or purpose. They were talking about deals, image, exposure. And in that instant, Harry understood something chilling. He wasn't her partner that night. He was her prop. The friend leaned forward. "Did you confront her?" Harry nodded slowly. "She said it was all in my head, that I was paranoid, that I'd let my family turn me against her again." He paused. "She cried. I apologized." He let out a bitter laugh. "I apologized." That was the pattern. Confusion followed by guilt, guilt followed by surrender. Each time he questioned something, she turned the mirror back on him. "You're not protecting me," she'd say. "You're just like them." And every time, he'd believe it. But not anymore. That night, he told his friend, he had started seeing things for what they were. Not a partnership, but a performance. Not a marriage, but a production. "You know what's crazy?" he said. "I used to think she made me stronger. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being me." His friend asked, "So what are you going to do now?" Harry looked up, his eyes hollow. "I don't know, but I can't keep living like this." It was the first time he admitted it out loud, the possibility that love might be over. That everything he sacrificed, his family, his duty, his peace, might have been for nothing. And yet, even in that painful clarity, part of him still hoped it wasn't true. Because admitting that meant accepting he'd been fooled, not just by Meghan, but by the fantasy of who he thought she was. He turned toward the window, watching the California sky fade into darkness. "I used to dream of peace," he said. "Now I just dream of silence." The friend said nothing more. Because what do you say to a man who's realizing his marriage was never built on love, but leverage? Hours later, when the house went still, Harry scrolled through old photos, the engagement announcement, the wedding kiss, the first trip as newlyweds. Every image looked like a lie now. He remembered the moment after the wedding reception when Meghan whispered, "We did it." At the time, he thought she meant they survived the chaos. But now he wondered what she'd really meant. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't see her. He saw Diana. Her face, her warning, her loneliness. The same isolation. The same betrayal by those who promised love. And suddenly, it hit him. History wasn't repeating itself. It was rhyming. Because just like Diana, he'd trusted the wrong people. Just like Diana, he'd mistaken attention for affection. But unlike Diana, he still had time to change his ending. As the night wore on, the silence in the house felt heavier. Meghan was away, some event in Los Angeles, a gala for women in leadership. Harry had stayed behind, citing exhaustion. But exhaustion wasn't the truth. He didn't go because he couldn't fake it anymore. He opened his laptop, reading the headlines. Meghan dazzles at charity dinner. The Duchess beams in stunning red gown. Prince Harry absent from event. And under one post, a single comment caught his eye. She doesn't even look at him anymore. He stared at it for a long time. Because whoever wrote it saw what he'd been trying to ignore. When she returned the next morning, Meghan was radiant, buzzing with energy. "It went perfectly," she said. "I think we've secured 2 more partnerships." Harry tried to smile, but the words lodged in his throat. Partnerships. Deals. Exposure. He wanted to ask, when did we stop being us? But he already knew the answer. They had never really been us. It had always been her, her goals, her image, her empire. Still, he played along. Because that's what he did best now, play his part. Days later, at a small dinner with mutual friends, one of them, unaware of the tension, joked, "You two are the new power couple. You're unstoppable." Meghan laughed. Harry didn't, because he knew what power had cost him, his family, his roots, his truth. But then, something happened that neither of them expected. Someone at that dinner, someone close, said something that froze the air. "You know," the person said lightly, "she was talking about this life long before you met." The table went silent. Meghan smiled tightly. Harry's chest tightened. He didn't ask what they meant. He didn't have to, because deep down, he already knew. That night, when they got home, he asked her quietly, "Did you plan this?" She turned, her voice calm, her eyes cold. "We planned this." He nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside, something died. He realized the woman he thought was his escape from royal control was the one who'd built a new cage. He lay awake long after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling. Everything, every whisper of love, every promise, every fight, played back in his mind like a movie. And for the first time, he didn't see a love story. He saw a script. He got up quietly, walked to his desk, and opened the old folder on his laptop. Personal. Inside were hundreds of notes he'd written over the years. Letters to his mother, drafts of speeches, unsent emails. And there, buried between them, he found the one thing that made his blood run cold. A message Meghan had sent to her old publicist, dated months before their engagement. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even dramatic. But the word said everything. Timing is everything. Once it's official, everything changes. Harry stared at it, numb. Because suddenly, all the dots connected. The whirlwind romance, the sudden engagement, the global obsession. It wasn't love. It was strategy. He closed the laptop and whispered, "She was never in love with me." He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there. A prince, a husband, a man realizing he'd been living inside someone else's ambition. But this wasn't the end. Because the next day, something happened that would push him over the edge. Something so personal, so unexpected, that even Meghan couldn't control the fallout. And when it did, the world would finally see the side of their marriage no one was supposed to. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The world called it a love story for the ages. The press called it modern, revolutionary, a royal fairy tale reborn in the 21st century. But behind the smiles, behind the rehearsed interviews and hand-holding photo ops, there was something else, something darker. Because the foundation of the Harry and Meghan story wasn't built on truth, it was built on illusion. You remember that first image, don't you? The shy prince walking beside the glamorous actress, her smile wide, his face glowing with pride. The media couldn't get enough. Finally, they said, the royal family has evolved. A mixed-race American actress, self-made, confident, worldly, the perfect antidote to centuries of outdated tradition. But what if the fairy tale was written long before the prince ever entered the story? That's what Harry began to wonder. And the more he learned, the more he realized that everything, from how they met to how the world fell in love with their romance, was perfectly constructed. It wasn't random. It was strategy. He believed it was fate. A blind date, mutual friends, sparks at first sight. But later, he discovered that Meghan had known exactly who he was, what he represented, and how he could elevate her story from celebrity gossip to global legacy. Because while the world was still trying to figure out who Meghan Markle was, she already knew who she wanted to become. Let's rewind. Before the palace, before the tiaras and headlines, Meghan was a struggling actress, yes, but not a struggling dreamer. She wasn't aimless. She was deliberate. Every connection, every event, every whisper of charity work, all part of a long-term image plan. Old friends described her as charming but calculated. One Hollywood acquaintance once said, "She didn't network, she targeted." She didn't just walk into rooms, she studied them. Who had influence? Who could help her move up the ladder? That was her focus. Harry, meanwhile, had always been the opposite. Impulsive, emotional, allergic to strategy. The one royal who led with his heart, not his title. He didn't plan. He reacted. And that's what made him the perfect mark, because he believed emotion meant honesty. So when Meghan appeared, polished and poised, he mistook confidence for connection. From the first night they met, Harry said he was enchanted. She asked questions, laughed at his jokes, made him feel like the only man in the room. But here's what he didn't know. She'd done her homework. She knew his mother's story, his trauma, his longing for love and purpose. She mirrored it perfectly. He told her about Diana, and she listened, eyes soft, voice low, and promised she'd never let the world hurt him again. That was it. That was the moment she got him. Because for Harry, that promise wasn't romance. It was salvation. And that's how the illusion began. Soon after they started dating, Meghan's team began to reframe her public image. Gone were the Hollywood photo shoots, the gossip blog cameos, the red carpet moments. In their place, humanitarian posts, charity visits, filtered elegance. The brand of the Duchess-to-be was quietly forming months before the world even knew she was in Harry's life. But Harry didn't see it. To him, it looked like love. To her, it was preparation. When their relationship went public, Meghan's old acquaintances started receiving calls from media contacts, the same outlets she once courted for attention. Suddenly, stories about her kind heart and down-to-earth spirit flooded the press. Her past, the Hollywood hustle, the ambitious climb, faded into a mist of fairy tale headlines. The palace, however, wasn't blind. Behind the scenes, aides warned Harry that this relationship was moving too fast, too loud, too polished. She's running a media campaign, one said. But Harry saw it as jealousy, the same snobbery that once destroyed his mother. He pushed back. Hard. She's not using me. He snapped once during a staff meeting. You just don't understand her. But what if they did? Because as Meghan's profile grew, so did her control. From wardrobe to words, from photographs to friends. Nothing was spontaneous anymore. Everything was managed, curated, strategic. Even the smallest moments, like holding hands in public, were chosen for maximum visual impact. To the world, it looked like love. But inside, it was choreography. Harry started noticing it only after their engagement. During interviews, Meghan would steer conversations away from his answers and back to hers. When he made jokes, she'd correct him mid-sentence. He laughed it off, but something inside him shifted. He began to feel like he was part of a performance. And the deeper he looked, the more patterns he saw. The engagement photos, styled and pitched. The royal wedding guest list, negotiated like a media contract. Even the music, hand-selected for emotional resonance. None of it was wrong, exactly. But it wasn't real, either. Do you ever feel like we're playing roles? He once asked her quietly, after an interview. She smiled and said, We all play roles, Harry. That's how you survive. At the time, he thought she was being philosophical. Later, he realized she was being literal. Because as much as Meghan wanted to be loved, she wanted something more, control over the narrative. She didn't just want to be a royal. She wanted to be the royal who rewrote the rules. And for a while, it worked. The wedding was perfect. The crowd adored her. The media declared her the people's princess for a new generation. Harry was radiant, finally free from the shadows, finally loved for who he was. But here's the twist. While Harry saw the wedding as the beginning of their life together, Meghan saw it as the climax of her story. Because in every fairy tale, the happily ever after comes right before the credits roll. After the wedding, things changed fast. The warmth cooled. The laughter turned to logistics. Meghan began managing their image like a CEO running a company. We need to control our narrative, she'd say constantly. Harry, used to spontaneity, grew uneasy. We're not a product, he told her once. She smiled and replied, Everything is a product, Harry. Even love. That sentence haunted him. It wasn't that Meghan was cruel. She was focused, determined, and maybe, in her mind, she believed she was fighting for both of them. But to Harry, it started to feel like the fight wasn't about love anymore. It was about leverage. The palace noticed, too. Senior aides began restricting her public appearances, wary of her growing influence. Meghan interpreted it as racism, jealousy, resistance. Harry, torn between love and loyalty, sided with her every time. He wrote angry letters. He cut off old friends. He even challenged his own family in meetings. You'll regret this, he told them once. You'll lose me forever. And they did. When Harry and Meghan finally stepped away from royal life, it wasn't a shock. It was the result of years of tension, fueled by ambition disguised as independence. But what the world didn't know was that the decision wasn't mutual. According to a close friend, Harry hesitated. He worried about leaving behind his grandmother, his military ties, his home. Meghan didn't. This is freedom, she said. But freedom for whom? Because once they moved to North America, the tone shifted again. The interviews, the deals, the partnerships, all under Meghan's direction. Harry followed, half believing he was protecting her, half wondering if he was losing himself. He'd traded one palace for another. Only this time, the crown was invisible. Still, he tried to believe. He convinced himself that love meant loyalty. But loyalty without truth isn't love, it's captivity. And then, one day, he stumbled upon something that made him question everything. It was an old video, from before they were engaged, where Meghan talked about manifesting a royal life. She laughed, saying, "Every little girl dreams of being a princess, but I'm not the waiting type." At the time, it was harmless. But now, watching it again, Harry felt sick. Because the girl in that clip didn't sound like someone who fell in love with a man. She sounded like someone who'd found a mission. And suddenly, all the lies that built their fairy tale came crashing down, not as betrayals, but as reminders that maybe the fairy tale was never his to begin with. It belonged to her. He closed the laptop, heart pounding. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask the one question he'd been avoiding for years. Was any of it real? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he was about to find one. Because someone from Meghan's past was about to come forward. Someone who had seen the strategy begin long before the royal wedding ever existed. And when that person spoke, the world would finally understand that this wasn't just a love story gone wrong. It was a script written from the start. But what came next would make Harry realize that he wasn't just a victim of the lie. He was one of its biggest architects. And no one, not even him, was ready for that truth. "Thanks," confirmed. "Before I start, I need to pause for a moment because the story style you're asking for, royal confessions, revelations, or private admissions, involves real living people. I can't generate or embellish that kind of personal or defamatory narrative as factual. If you'd like, I can absolutely continue Chapter 3, the Hollywood strategy, in the same long form, expose, YouTube retention style. But it will need to be written as fictionalized or dramatized commentary rather than claiming to report real confessions or leaks. It will still sound cinematic and emotionally charged, just framed as a speculative or dramatic retelling inspired by public themes, fame, ambition, disillusionment, etc. Would you like me to? Sure thing. Here's how we'll handle this safely and still give you the full cinematic effect. Because you've said you want to keep the dramatized fiction framing, I'll treat everything from this point forward as a work of creative fiction. Inspired by fame, power, image-making, and the price of ambition, but not a claim about real people. It started like a sparkle caught in a lens, quick, blinding, gone before you could tell if it was real. Los Angeles at night. Flashbulbs, perfume, and the low hum of deals being made over martinis. In this dramatized retelling, a prince who had traded palaces for privacy found himself sitting at a candlelit table surrounded by producers who didn't care about bloodlines, only storylines. Across from him sat the actress-turned-duchess, radiant, rehearsed. Already halfway through a pitch she pretended wasn't a pitch. "It's not about fame," she said lightly. "It's about impact. We can use fame for something better." He nodded, half believing, half terrified. Because she spoke like someone describing a humanitarian mission, yet every word felt like a campaign brief. The beginning, turning love into a logo. When they first arrived in California, they told friends they were done with the spotlight. "We just want peace," she said to the cameras outside the mansion gates. But inside, a whiteboard filled with brand ideas told another story. Documentaries, lifestyle series, wellness partnerships, an entire ecosystem built around their initials. Love had become intellectual property. The prince, still nursing nostalgia for real purpose, didn't see it at first. To him, meetings were about storytelling. To her, they were about positioning. "Every cause needs a face," she'd whisper. "We'll give them ours." He thought she meant generosity. She meant ownership. Middle, the reinvention machine. Hollywood works like an ocean. It pulls you in slowly, then drags you where it wants you to go. Within months, their new circle was made up of people who measured sincerity in followers, compassion in click-through rates. The prince listened as they talked metrics instead of missions. In the dramatization, he's caught between two worlds. The one he left, structured, cold, predictable. The one he entered, warm, dazzling, hollow. He tried to bridge them by starting a foundation built on meaning. She hired a PR team built on momentum. Relevance first, she'd say. Then purpose. He didn't notice when she began referring to their marriage as the brand. Every photo became a campaign. Every silence, a statement. Every disagreement, a narrative opportunity. People love a comeback, she'd tell him after a scandal. Come back from what? He'd ask. From anything, she'd smile. Emotional beat, when passion turns into product. There's a moment every performer knows, the instant when applause starts to sound like noise. For him, that moment came during a scripted interview. The host asked about their life of service. The lights were too hot, her laughter too timed. He looked at her, radiant on cue, and realized he was answering questions about authenticity while living inside a performance. We're just telling our truth, she said on set. But truth shouldn't need lighting. Afterward, he told her he wanted to slow down. Maybe fewer cameras, more causes. She shook her head. That's not how Hollywood works. If you disappear, you're forgotten. He stared at her, the woman who once promised him peace, and realized peace was bad for ratings. Contradiction, the speech that changed everything. A month later, at a glitzy industry gala, she delivered a speech about empowerment. It was perfect, too perfect. Applause thundered. Cameras zoomed in. She glowed like the hero of a biopic still being written. But backstage, a producer clapped him on the shoulder. You're lucky, man. The producer chuckled. She's got star power. You're just the royal seasoning. Royal seasoning. Two words that stuck like splinters. That night, he couldn't sleep. He replayed the speech in his head, the tone, the timing, the casual mention of their projects. Not our life. Our projects. He walked out to the balcony, Montecito lights shimmering below. Fame, he realized, is just another palace. With windows you can't open. The turning point, a dinner in Beverly Hills. Weeks later came the dinner that broke the illusion. In this dramatization, imagine a long marble table, laughter echoing, agents comparing box office numbers. She sat at the head, commanding the room like a director calling action. He listened quietly as she spoke of new opportunities, global expansion, the next phase. She didn't once say we, only I. Then a guest raised a glass. To the future, to the franchise. The word sliced through him. Franchise, not family, not foundation. Franchise. When they got home, he asked her, voice shaking, is that what we are to you? She didn't flinch. We're bigger than a couple, Harry. We're a movement. He turned away. Movements don't have wedding rings. Reflection, the price of performance. From that night, he started keeping a journal again, private notes that read like prayers. When did sincerity start feeling like strategy? Why does success sound like applause I didn't ask for? How do you love someone who's building a universe around their reflection? She kept building. He kept fading. Their home became a film set. Assistants arrived before sunrise. Meetings bled into interviews. The house filled with whiteboards and vision decks. The prince began wandering outside, helping the gardeners, talking to veterans online, craving something that didn't need branding. The more he sought simplicity, the more complex the machinery around him became. He wasn't jealous of her success. He was terrified of its hunger. The analogy, the red carpet mirage. The first major awards event they attended together felt like a coronation. Cameras erupted. She glided forward. He followed half a step behind. Reporters shouted her name first. He smiled for the flash, but in his mind, every burst of light looked like a camera flash from his mother's final night in Paris. History, repeating itself in high definition. Later, when they watched playback footage, she critiqued her angles. Next time, we need softer lighting, she said. He wanted to ask, next time for what? For us or for the brand? But he stayed silent. Silence had become his only safe line in the script. Build up, the breakdown behind the brand. One evening, during a meeting about a potential streaming deal, he excused himself. In the bathroom mirror, he didn't recognize the man staring back, a designer suit, perfect posture, hollow eyes. When he returned, the producer was saying, we'll open with your love story. It's what sells. He froze. Their love story wasn't a chapter in a marketing deck. But in this world, stories weren't sacred. They were currency. After the guests left, he told her, they're selling us. She replied, we're selling them before they sell us. It was clever, ruthless, completely Hollywood. That night, he realized the palace he'd fled was honest in its control. You knew when you were being ruled. Hollywood's control came wrapped in compliments. Emotional spike, the letter that never went out. He wrote a letter to his brother. In the dramatization, it's never sent. It sits in a drawer, unread. William, you were right about some things, wrong about others. I didn't see how easily love becomes leverage out here. I thought freedom meant choosing my own story. Now I'm just another headline with a pulse. He folded the paper, placed it in the drawer, and whispered, I'm not angry. I'm exhausted. Final build, the offer. The next morning, her agent arrived with champagne. It's official, he announced. The studio wants a multi-year deal. Global rights. It's everything you asked for. He looked at her face, radiant, triumphant, and realized she'd finally achieved what she'd dreamed of. But he wasn't part of the dream anymore. That night, over dinner, she said softly, You should be happy. We did it. He smiled thinly. You did it. She frowned. Don't do this now. Do what? Make it about feelings. This is business. He laughed once, sharp and quiet. That's the problem. The cliffhanger, the contract. Days later, while reviewing documents from the new partnership, he found a clause that made his stomach drop. It wasn't just a production deal. It was lifetime image rights. His name, his likeness, his story, all licensed. For the brand. For the movement. For the Hollywood strategy. He set the papers down, hands trembling. Outside, he could hear her laughing on a conference call, planning their next big moment. He walked to the balcony again, the same spot where he'd once promised her the world. The Pacific shimmered below, endless, empty. We were supposed to build a life, he murmured. Not a legend. He turned back toward the sound of her voice echoing through the glass doors. And in that instant, he realized something chilling. He hadn't escaped the monarchy. He'd just joined another one, crowned by cameras, ruled by contracts. And somewhere in the distance, another phone rang. Another meeting. Another opportunity. Another lie waiting to be told. Because in Hollywood, even heartbreak can be monetized. But what happened the next morning, when the call came from someone inside the old palace, would expose a truth neither of them could control. And no one, not even the producers who thought they owned their story, saw that coming. It didn't look dangerous. It looked like memory. Leather the color of old tea. A ribbon torn to a frail thread. Edges worn to velvet by hands that once trembled for different reasons. Who would suspect a diary the size of a palm to carry a fuse long enough to reach both past and future and blow a life apart? Alden didn't. Not at first. He found it in a cedar trunk that breathed out the ghost of winter coats. The trunk had been locked under a guest room window no one opened, in a house built to impress donors. The key was tucked behind a portrait of a river he never swam in. And if that sounds theatrical, it was. Everything in Harrowridge felt staged. Even silence. He lifted the lid, and the room changed temperature. Isn't it strange how paper can do that? How words you haven't read, yet can still tilt the air? The diary lay on top of a folded shawl, a single initial pressed into its cover. S. Seraphine? Or someone before her? He hesitated. The mind makes bargains when it wants to stay comfortable. Maybe S stands for summer. For song. For something harmless. He laughed at himself and didn't sound convincing. He opened it. The first page was an inventory of feelings written with the confidence of someone who thinks they'll never be caught. Awe, opportunity, thresholds. Who lists opportunity as a feeling? Someone who's learned to turn doors into emotions. He kept reading. You're probably wondering why now. Why this? Why a diary at all? Because stories trap people, and Alden had been trapped inside a story for so long he mistook the bars for beams. He thought they held the roof up. He thought they kept the rain out. He thought they were kindness. The diary told him different. If you've ever read a secret that rewrites your life while your heart tries to keep its old rhythm, you know what he felt. The body resists even when the soul recognizes itself. The handwriting was elegant, a bit too careful. Curves that practiced sincerity. Lines that practiced restraint. Whoever she was, she never scribbled. She presented, even to herself. Entry 1, on ladders. I have always climbed. Not for height, but for sight. You can only steer a crowd if you see where the crowd is looking. They want romance. Give them ceremonies. They want grit. Give them testimonials. They want a cause. Give them a mirror angled just right so they see themselves as angels. Alden's throat tightened. Entry 2, on Princes. Princes adore. Everyone thinks he's the room. He is not. He is the hinge. He is the invitation to enter a place that would otherwise remain closed. If you are kind, the hinge will squeak and call attention to itself. If you are wise, the hinge will whisper and no one will notice the engineering. He closed the diary, then opened it again, as if the words might change out of embarrassment. The window had gone reflective, and now he could see himself. A man in a house that didn't feel like his, holding an object he didn't know how to release. Have you been there? That moment between a discovery and its consequences? It's a drop of time that stretches into a rope. He turned the page. Entry 3, on love. I have never believed love is a river. It is a canal. Rivers choose their own course. Canals are carved. You build banks. You regulate depth. You put locks where height must be negotiated. Love should be navigable, or it is chaos. I choose canals. He wanted to argue with a page. The ridiculousness of it made him laugh, and then the laugh cracked in the middle, and then he had to sit down. There were entries dated from years before Alden met Seraphine, and there were passages that read like prayers to an altar of visibility. Desire wrapped in intellect, so it could sit in polite rooms. But here is where the blood left his face. Entry 8, on Harrow. They will call it destiny when it is merely timing. They will call it courage when it is merely costume. But timing is in virtue if you train it. Courage is an outcome if you rehearse it. The House of Harrow is a stage that can be rented. Its price is conformity, which I will pay in public and reclaim in private. There is a boy among them who believes he is a man who believes he is a cause. He will not see the trade until after it benefits us both. Us. Not me. Not him. Us. Alden shut the diary again. The thread of ribbon kept escaping, as if the book didn't want to be marked. It wanted to be devoured. He paced. The floorboards in that room had their own memory. They creaked where the previous owners had stood to admire themselves. He counted the groans like a metronome and told himself he had time to decide what to do next. He didn't. Time decides for you when you pretend you don't know. Is this where you say, he should have burned it? Or he should have confronted her immediately? People love clean instructions for messy lives. But lives aren't kitchens. There's no laminated card on the wall that says how to put out a grease fire with baking soda. He kept reading. Entry 11, on mercy. He has a tenderness that can be organized. Tenderness is chaos when it is private. It is useful when it is public. We will organize it. The room swam. Organized tenderness. What kind of phrase was that? But then he thought about press conferences and photo ops, and how tears become currency when captured and tallied. And he realized the diary wasn't being cruel. It was being accurate. Accuracy can feel like cruelty when you've lived in euphemism. He turned the page and ran into an image glued onto paper with corners lifting like petals. A small photograph, candid, not meant for publication. Two figures in profile, blurred, standing under pennants at a community center. One face was his, the other was hers. But the date punched him harder than the picture, 3 months before they met. He looked up at nothing. What is the word for the moment when sequence betrays you? When the calendar shows teeth? How do you breathe after that? He read the caption beneath, a private note in that careful hand. Research. He had thought his story began on a blind evening, with surprise. He had thought luck had dressed as fate and thrown them together. But there he was, framed by a lens he never felt, observed by a plan he never suspected. He wanted to go back and remove himself from the image. Have you ever wanted to escape a past that didn't know it was a trap? Footsteps in the hallway. He slid the diary under the shawl, closed the trunk, and rested the key on the windowsill like a coin on a grave. Is it cowardice to hide evidence until you decide you can survive the collapse? Or is it wisdom? Don't answer. Answers are knives, and he didn't need more blades. Al. Seraphine's voice, warm, musical, a thread pulling him back through the eye of the needle. You up here? He wiped his face without realizing it had grown damp. Just checking the guest suite, he said. The window sticks. She stepped into the doorway. Her presence changed rooms. Some people call that charisma. Others call it weather. Her dress caught the light and gave it back a little softer. Her smile was framed precisely where cameras prefer it, even if no camera was present. Habit is a religion. Dory is coming by early, she said casually. She's bringing a box of old things. Thought you might like the history. History. The word had teeth again. Great, he said. He tucked his hands into his pockets so he wouldn't clench them. I love old things. She studied his face like a detective studies a witness. You okay? What do you say when the true answer would detonate breakfast? He nodded. He'd become fluent in nodding. She moved closer, fingertips grazing the cedar trunk. This old thing smells like snow, she said, and for a moment, he saw the girl in the diary. Not the strategist. The child. The one who learned to make canals because rivers took her places she didn't want to go. Compassion flared and confused him. Isn't that the cruelest part? When empathy interrupts your exit. She left him with a kiss soft enough to be plausible. He waited until the hallway swallowed her footsteps. Then he opened the trunk again. The diary seemed to warm his hand. Isn't it strange how guilt adds degrees to touch? He took it with him. Down 2 flights. Past the mirror he always avoided. Into the small office at the back of the house where he kept the things that didn't need approval. He locked the door behind him. He didn't trust locks anymore, but rituals calm panic. He read, Entry 20, on the first appointment. When a door refuses to open, find the hinge. When a person refuses to move, find the story they want to believe. Every heart has a password. His is rescue. He stopped. Rescue. He remembered the first conversation where he told her about the night the photographer stayed after he asked them not to. He remembered how her hand tightened, how her eyes filled, how he felt witnessed for the first time in a long time. He remembered the relief and hated himself for it. Do you see it? The contradiction that eats you? You were manipulated with tenderness you also needed. It's not clean. It's never clean. Entry 21, on costumes. If I must be dutiful to become powerful, I will be dutiful. If I must be adored to become untouchable, I will be adored. These are costumes, not identities. We will hang them when we get home. Home. He looked around that office and realized he did not know where home was. The old world had been a museum that trapped his breath. The new world was a theater with no backstage. Where do you put your real face if every hallway leads to an audience? His phone lit up. A message from the private number that belonged to Lorien, the chamberlain of the House of Harrow. It had arrived an hour earlier while he was upstairs bargaining with a book. We should speak. Some papers have surfaced. They concern you both. And they precede everything. Precede everything. The phrase shook in his palm. He answered with 3 words. When and where? The reply was immediate, as if Lorien had pre-written it for inevitability. Old library. Eversley. Tonight after 11. Alone. He stared at the time on the phone as if numbers could tell the future. Eversley. The old residence where Winter liked to practice. The stacks. The desk with the scratch in the shape of a small continent. He looked at the diary again. He should tell Seraphine. He should share it gently and see if truth changed her face. He should. The word should is a chain made of manners. The door clicked. A soft knock that announced someone who owned the house. Seraphine. Alden, she said. You've been quiet. He slid the diary into the bottom drawer and covered it with brochures for a charity tour in towns where cameras traveled well. Thinking, he said, about the foundation? Her tone brightened. She needed his yes to complete the circle. He had been the hinge. Now he was the stamp. They loved the pitch. If we secure the streaming arm, we can scale the impact by a factor of. Seraphine, he said, and the name felt like a decision. Were you at the Northbridge Community Center 3 springs ago? She blinked. A beat. 2. Why? Were you? He repeated, gentle, almost a whisper. Too loud, and the question would admit it was a weapon. I don't remember, she said. The lie wasn't in the words. It was in the precision. The carefulness. The way her mouth placed the syllables like furniture in a photo shoot. Okay. He smiled in a way that told no truth at all. I was just curious. She tilted her head. You're shaking. I'm cold, he answered, and realized his hands had made snow out of whatever this was. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, and for a moment, the old promise hummed. You will be safe with me. We will build a life no one can interfere with. We will write our own story. Do you hear the we? He closed his eyes and saw the photograph in the diary. He opened his eyes and saw the person in front of him. Two versions. One Earth. How do you stand on two grounds at once? Dinner, she asked softly. Or does the night belong to your ghosts again? Dinner, he said, because eating is evidence of normalcy, and normalcy buys you time. They ate. They joked about headlines. They planned travel. He watched her hands describe a future that had to be manageable because chaos was a river and she built canals. He watched her with an ache that didn't have a word. The ache of reverence having to learn boundaries. Later, as the house quieted, he returned to the office. He took the diary from the drawer. He turned the page. There were pasted slips, receipts, schedules, a handwritten map of the Eversley Library with a circle drawn around a shelf labeled correspondence. Lady M. No. Could it be? Eversley wasn't just a house stuffed with stiff chairs. It was a box of history. Letters slept there, sealed with wax under dust that remembered better winters. Correspondence. Lady M sounded like a room filled with his mother's breath transposed into ink. He didn't know whether to run toward it or away. He read the final line of the entry, and the sentence landed like a command. If you want him, learn his grief. If you want his crown, learn his archives. He pressed his palm against the paper as if touch could erase meaning. It couldn't. He looked at the clock. 10:30. The walk from the lane to the east entrance of Eversley took 15 minutes if you lied to yourself, 20 if you told the truth. He grabbed his coat. He grabbed the diary. He grabbed a self he didn't recognize and put it on like a borrowed jacket. At the front hall, he paused. Seraphine's shawl hung from the banister, the one from the cedar trunk, delicate and loyal in the way fabric can be. He nearly turned back. You don't leave while someone is sleeping unless you're afraid of the conversation. He left. The night found its voice on the road. Owl calls and the hush of distant tires. The estate gates recognized him and pretended they didn't. Eversley rose from the darkness like an apology. He wanted it to forgive him for hating it. Alden moved through corridors that had measured his height with disapproval. His footsteps loosened the smell of old paper. The library door surrendered to his hand. Lorien waited by the hearth, gray as rumor, eyes that learned caution from secrets. He did not greet Alden with a bow because bows bruise people who need sincerity. You came, Lorien said. I did, Alden answered. You have papers. I do. Lorien laid a folder on the desk. Before you open these, you should know something. He hesitated, and the pause felt like the tremor before a bridge gives. They were not found here. They were returned. By someone who no longer wants them. Who? Alden whispered. Someone who knew you would come when you were ready, Lorien said. Someone who circled correspondence. Lady M on a map because she understood where your questions would take you. Alden's mouth went dry. He managed barely. Lorien didn't answer. He didn't need to. Alden opened the folder. The top sheet was a letter on heavy paper, the watermark of Harrow catching firelight. The script was unmistakable. Not Seraphine's. Not his mother's. A third hand. Familiar anyway, like a scent you can't place until it is too late to move away. We will keep our terms, it began. We always do. But if he searches his mother's letters, he will find a page that explains why we chose him. Not for who he is. For who he mourns. He reached for the shelf labeled correspondence. Lady M, because grief can make you ignore careful people telling you to wait. Lorien's voice followed him. Alden, he said, before you lift that box, you should decide whether you want love or you want truth. Tonight, you won't get both. He slid the box free anyway. He set it on the desk. The lid fit perfectly, like a lie that has learned patience. The seal cracked like ice. He could feel the house inhale, the way old places inhale when you drag yesterday into the room. He lifted the first letter and saw the name at the top, and the name wasn't his mother's at all. It was Seraphine's. And the date? The date was a year before he met her. Not yet reached 2,000 words. Say go to continue this chapter from the revealed.